and it's just really kind of encouraging, and it gives us a really kind of nice bit of hope. So it's always quite nice to kind of support wherever we can. So my name's Joe Jack Williams. I'm an associate at FCB. I look after sustainability, which is kind of why I'm here talking. We've got 4 of us from FCB here today. So there's Peter Clegg, who will be talking next, and then Charlotte and Izzy, who will also be talking. Me and Peter will talk a bit. Peter's going to talk about sort of the practice a bit, and I'm going to talk a bit more about some of our kind of design philosophies and a bit more of a technical kind of side. And then Charlotte and Izzy are going to talk about a couple of projects. We've got a bit of flex and a bit of time, so perhaps after Peter we'll have a few questions then if there's direct things about the practice, and then after my bit, because they're a bit longer, we can have a few questions there, so maybe just sling them in the chat box so you can see them and pick them up, and then we'll probably put Charlotte and Izzy together as one bit and have a sort of general Q&A afterwards, but do ping through questions as they come up and go forward. But Peter, I don't know if you want to sort of introduce yourself and share your slides. I know you've got them somewhere.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I hope this is going to work. Let me see if I can go to my... This is where it doesn't work. Hold on. Get rid of that. And how are we doing? Is that looking like it might be a PowerPoint?
That is looking like Windows Explorer currently, Peter.
I think you're sharing Windows Explorer specifically.
Oh. Stop share. Sorry about this.
It's okay.
What am I sharing now? Have you got my screen now by any chance?
Not yet.
No. If there's a lag, Peter, it might be worth turning off your video and just sharing your screen, because it sometimes helps.
Okay, let's do that. Wait a minute.
And then if not, I've got it to hand as well, so I can share it and give you control, I think.
Oh, you can? Well,
yeah.
Maybe you should do that then. Can you give me control? Yeah, that might be better.
2 seconds. Here we go.
That's fine. Can all see that, yeah.
Right. So can you give me control? How do I accept control?
And if I just give you give control to Peter, so that should work now for you, Peter.
Okay.
Can you look? There you go.
Right. Okay. Are we cycling through? Okay. Fine.
Perfect.
Okay. Let me just turn this. Right. So Joe Jack has asked me to give a very brief, effectively, history of the practice, I suppose. So I'm going to take you through 40 years in 60 slides and in 20 minutes. But basically, I thought what might be quite useful for you is to know how we have grown up as a practice that is really strongly based around social and environmental architecture. And this is taking a long time to change. In fact, it's not changing at all. Are you sure have I got?
Should be.
Oh, I've got, yes, maybe it's just changing very slowly. Okay, this is just a bit about my history. The practice was set up in 78. In 74, I was in the States when there was a gasoline shortage throughout the States, right? So petrol stations closed, etc. And you can see the graph along the bottom there of real cost in terms of dollars of petroleum, which of course threw everybody into great consternation. And still not, it's a real delay.
Should I click through it?
Yeah, I click through it now. Yeah. Okay. I'll just say next. Okay, right. So I was in the midst of a course where I was looking at environmental design and architecture. We were looking at these kind of things, and because people perceived that there was a lack of fossil fuels, not fossil fuels damaging the environment, but a lack of fossil fuels, people were very interested in solar energy. So we were looking at architecture like this. Next one. And this is me and my wife, and we started working with a guy who set up a solar collector business. So this is solar water heating. And I produced this as a thesis at Yale University, which had the posh title of Decentralized Service Systems for Housing. And some smart guy down from a publishing company came along and turned it into a book, next one, which was called Energy for the Home. And this was 1974. Bear in mind this huge shortage, panic shortage, much greater panic than there is now, in fact, because people thought the energy sources are disappearing. Anyway, so this book, which sold 100,000 copies in the first year, and actually we made quite a bit of money out of it, which was very nice. Next, we came back to England and I finished my architecture education. And a year after finishing it, I set up with Richard Fielden, and we bought a little, with the proceeds of that book, we bought a house in Bath, a 5-story Georgian house for £10,000, which you could do in those days. And we set up the architecture shop in 1978. We weren't architects. We had got hardly any experience at all. We were very interested in building. We were very interested in energy, and we were very interested in community. So that was where we were in 78. The next one, in the first 12 years, we bought shops next to it and set up a practice of about 25 people by that stage. And this is us all doing our semaphore happy birthday sign or something. But it was a practice that was completely founded on passive solar design. It was a practice that was founded on social environmental principles. Next one. We spent a lot of time in the first few years working with this very hippie organization in Bristol. This is about 78 to 80. And it's a group of people who wanted to demonstrate how to insulate your home and how to generate solar energy in your home. So this is all voluntary work, working with a local pressure group. Next, it was called the Urban Centre for Appropriate Technology. Many of you will have heard of the Centre for Alternative Technology. That was a sister organization in North Wales. Next. And we built this extraordinary, the city gave us an old house to convert basically. And we demonstrated all kinds of ways in which you could insulate and renovate a house. Next. And we talked about building a new house immediately next to it, which is a demonstration solar house. Next. And so what I want to talk about for the next 15 minutes is really just 30 years of practice after that, starting from that little, if you go to the next one, this is a sort of chart that we did, which shows the beginnings of the practice there. And I'm just going to take you through just a few of these projects that have shown how we developed our expertise in low energy design. Next one. So there we are, going right the way through. I hadn't realized this was moving like this. That's okay, that's fine. One of the first ones we did in '85 was a passive solar house looking at in Milton Keynes. So this has actually got quadruple glazing. It's got a mechanical ventilation, heat recovery, everything that you would expect these days as kind of standard if you were doing a passive house sort of design. We were worried about overheating, but it didn't overheat. Next one. Interestingly, this one here, this is a scheme that we did 25 years later, where we turned those roofs around the other way, because in that period of time, of course, in the early 80s, no one had yet invented photovoltaic cells. So in the intervening period, the whole approach to low energy design changed, and passive solar was really questioned as there's too much heat loss as well as too much heat gain. And actually what we really need is collecting surfaces. So the roofs have turned around the other way. So that's kind of interesting what happens over 25 years. Next. And about 1991, we moved into this building, which is Bath Brewery. I should have said that we set up ourselves outside the RIBA, and we set ourselves up deliberately running a design and build company and a development design and build company. In fact, this was one of our developments, was buying this office for ourselves. In those days, the bank would give you money without even guarantees, etc. I should also admit that we went bankrupt after having done this scheme. So it's a high risk, potentially high reward, but certainly high risk business development. We haven't done anything since about 1992. Next. That time we were also doing projects like this, which is the Real World Studios for Peter Gabriel, which is a kind of, again, a really interesting, completely new type of building, recording studio in the middle of the countryside, just outside Bath. Fantastic client, great fun. Next. And we're also doing very tedious looking houses like this, but very different to a lot of houses that we've done. These were super insulated. They were prefabricated in Finland, brought to the site. No heating system in these houses, just a ventilation system with a tiny 1.5 kilowatt heater battery in it. So no conventional heating system, just relying on a heating bill of £30 a year for this house. And we were doing this before people had really invented the whole passive house system, but this was basically to those standards. Next. We're also experimenting a lot with timber as a biomaterial, as a grown material, as a material that sequesters carbon. Next. And in particular, we were looking at we did this building, which I think is probably the lowest embodied energy we've ever done. This building has no concrete in it at all. It's on some little sheet pile foundations, and it's all made out of indigenous timber, oak frame, larch and Douglas fir cladding. Next. So it's a school for the, it's a theatre in a school called Bedales near Petersfield in Hampshire. Next. And we're also doing the first commercial building we did, not really a commercial building, but because we'd shown signs of interest in all of this work, Greenpeace came to us and said, we want to convert our building in Islington, which is still their headquarters. So that was quite a breakthrough for us, doing an office building in the mid 80s, next, early 90s, I guess. And then the BRE equally came to us, the building research establishment said, well, we want to build an experimental low energy office building, which was a great project to get. So we produced this, and we're now, next one, we're now actually converting that after 30 years. This was another interesting commercial building that we did for the Open University. All of the people that we were working for at that stage were social housing providers or universities or schools, etc., entirely in the public realm. Next. These guys weren't. This was a very peculiar organization called Rare. They actually, if you're a games player, they invented Super Mario, Donkey Kong, all of those things. But it was, again, they were very interested in low energy design. Next. And the Oxtal's campus at the University of Gloucestershire. I show this because it's the first big photovoltaic installation we did. The next one. And also a building that had an experimental ventilation system, looking at the way you can store energy in the floors of the building. Next. And this was the PV installation over a Northlight system over sports halls that actually then was a very substantial installation. And this one's was the next biggest one, I suppose, that we did, which is a place called the Earth Center, photovoltaic canopy structure designed with some amazing engineers and built by some amazing carpenters, in fact, using waste wood from Scottish pulp mills. This would have all gone into paper mills, but we reclaimed, in a sense, the Douglas fir poles and put together a structure that spanned over this environmental visitor center. Next. And then a fairly big breakthrough in the 90s, mid 90s, or actually probably early 20th century, come to think of it. I can't remember when this was now, early 20th century. The new headquarters for the National Trust in Swindon, in the Brunel Yard there. Really looking at what the roof of the building can do in terms of absorbing solar energy through PV cells, as well as providing north lights and ventilation. Next. So what you're looking at here is a very ordinary, relatively cheap building designed to sort of institutional development standards, entirely naturally lit, beautifully naturally lit, but quite ordinary shed-like spaces which are inhabited quite high density. Next. And an exterior frontage there. Something's gone wrong with the images there, I'm afraid, but the exterior colonnade, which gives access to the front of the building. Next. And just two images of the interior spaces, again, using timber from about 20 of the different National Trust properties, and a welcoming space that welcomes visitors into the building. Next. And if you go through just these next four, Joe, and basically what we're looking at here is a system that we developed with Max Fordhams, the environmental engineers, looking at how you measure a building and what's good practice in terms of kilowatt hours of carbon dioxide per square meter per year, best practice of innovative and pioneering. And below the line, I think if you click the next two, Joe, you'll find that we've put we can reduce obviously the energy that we lose and the energy the overall energy consumption of the building, but we can also save energy or produce energy through I've just noticed that those are the wrong way around. The energy produced should be below, the energy saved should be above. But you can see that we're kind of getting a balance there between the potential of a building to collect enough energy for its operational costs. And so you're getting towards a net zero carbon building. Next. And can we go to the next one? Running out of time a little bit. So that was just a book that we produced at that time. Next. And of course, we then started working for developers, which was interesting. One of the first ones we did was the Sterling Prize winning Accordia scheme, where it was more interesting from a social perspective than an environmental perspective. And it was all based around communal garden spaces, including this great field here. Next. And shrinking, this is a woodland area that everybody enjoyed as well. And the next one, we produced a variety of smaller and more intimate internal spaces with gardens on every floor, quite often in 3-story houses, but bigger open spaces. Next. And spaces that really worked for the occupants as play spaces for kids. And this one was a scheme in Brighton, working to One Planet Living standards, looking at putting together a community of about 140 units here that were actually based on very, very low energy consumption targets, but also allowing people shared communal facilities, spaces to meet and spaces in fact to garden. So if you go to the next couple of slides, I think you can see, and the next one, we've actually ended up with quite usable garden spaces on the roof and the internal balconies of this building. Next. Again, a very, very low embodied energy building here for the Woodland Trust in Grantham. And everything was made out of timber, including the floor plates, the walls, everything came to site as big cassette panels out of timber. And it was one of the cheapest buildings we ever created, and also one of the best performing. Next. And going up in scale a little bit to Manchester Metropolitan University and looking at their business school here. Very different kind of scale of a building. Next. You can see the section through the building on the right-hand side there, with two strong atria spaces providing natural light right the way down into the space, and plant rooms on the top, and obviously a south-facing roof slope that is covered with photovoltaics. So on a much larger and almost industrial institutional scale, we're using the same principles that we've used elsewhere. Next. And another university and city building. This was the City of Worcester Library. interesting from a perspective using lots of timber construction for these pyramidal roofs. And here we're using a completely naturally ventilated system. So you can see that these pyramidal roofs ventilate through the top, and air is drawn in through underground and underfloor duct underneath the section there. Next. And next. And we've also done a lot of work on existing buildings. This is the Hayward Gallery, replacing these iconic roof lights with a roof light system that works. That's actually the pyramids of glass become the shading devices over the roof lights. Next. Won't go into detail on that, but you can see, and the next one, Joe. And looking at the interior design of these spaces and rethinking the mechanical ventilation systems and taking a lot of energy use out of them just by working very closely with the M&E engineers. Next. Going abroad, going to Toronto, big university building there. We were asked to do that because of our interest in low energy design, interestingly. So it's taken us abroad, having this specialism. Next one is the first passive house building that we did, which was about sort of 5 or 6 years ago, a very simple little building for the University of Oxford, who at that time had said all of their new buildings were passive house standards. And the next one is a building that we got planning permission for. Next one, Joe, is in South London, looking at timber frame, entirely timber frame building adjacent to Clapham Station. And we're looking for someone to build this out. We've got permission for it. It's a pretty much net zero carbon building. And the next one, one that Joe might talk a little bit more about, this is on site at the moment. And here we're looking at in intense detail at all of the materials that go into this building. It will be net zero carbon for the first 60 years of its life. It's built to passive house standards. It's entirely timber frame, but clad in brickwork. And it's, it's going to be a really interesting precedent to study. Next. And I think that's the end. I think I've almost got through that in 20 minutes. So that's the history of the practice in a kind of nutshell. And all I'd end up by saying is that actually the principles that we set out at the beginning of working with socially motivated clients and environmentally motivated clients have enabled us to get the most extraordinary range of clients, as you can see, to work with, from Greenpeace, National Trust, Woodland Trust, all these university sectors clients, and a lot of work within the educational sector. Everybody, but now we're doing a lot more work in the commercial sector because they too are very, very interested in what the future holds for us, for the planet. I'll leave it there, Joe, and hand back to you.
Great, thanks, Peter. And apologies if the slides were slightly out of order.
No.
A glamorous assistant role, yeah, a bit tricky. So it's probably worth just having a couple of minutes, just if there's any questions on that kind of process and how we got to where we did. There's sort of 40 years of FCB in not very much time. So
yeah, if anyone wants to put any questions to the chat, I don't know if they go to co-host, but they should come to me and I can relay them back. So yeah, if you could type your questions in the chat, if you do have any. I'll give a minute or so.
Okay.
I did just have a question though. I just wanted to ask in general, and is there still a reluctance for developers to accept and embed low energy design initiatives like into their constructions, and why is that the case?
Well, I would say there isn't really. I mean, it's changing. It has changed really rapidly. I mean, there's a whole other section of the talk in a way that we could give, but I mean, the Extinction Rebellion has had a very positive impact on this. Architects Declare, and amongst other pressure groups, we set up a group called Architects Declare, which now has 1,000 signatory practices in the UK, 6,000 globally. And we also, if you look at the way the developers are going, I mean, there is now a developer organization that is really committed to changing things in the next 10, 15 years. And that's a really important change that's happened. So at the moment, we're working, a lot of developers are coming to us and saying, look, we've signed up to these targets. How the hell do we meet them? I wouldn't say they're all like that. And there are some people, particularly one would say the major house builders, who are actually lagging behind. But a lot of our developers are being quite enlightened in their approach to low energy design.
Great, thanks for that. We haven't got any questions in the chat. I'm sure there probably will be quite a few questions at the end of all the talks.
Okay.
So I don't really want to hold it up too long,
No.
but should we proceed to the next presentation? And then if there's questions at the end, we can relay them back.
Yep.
Smashing, yeah, I'll get going.
Go for
Thanks,
it.
Peter. So
Thanks, Peter.
I'm going to talk in a much less fun way, although I'll try and fill it full of gags to make it a bit more interesting. I'm going to talk a bit more about the kind of techniques of what we do on a kind of day-to-day basis, and what we see as happening. And one of the things and shifts we've seen over the last year is about in kind of embodied carbon. And I'm going to talk a bit about embodied carbon, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about One Planet Living. So Peter mentioned One Brighton, and we're going to talk about that. I'll just quickly touch those things, but to give you an idea of the kind of broad holistic sustainability. So this, I presume you can all see my screen now. Is that, yeah, I'm getting some nods and some thumbs up, perfect. This is the UK electricity grid. I'd really recommend anybody goes to this grid.iamkate.com. If you're into energy and carbon, I find it kind of relaxing. If it's a kind of miserable, windy day like it is today, I look at this and realize just how much of that wind is generating carbon-free power for us. So when I did this screenshot back in the end of January, a third of our energy was coming from green sources, and it's January. It's not like a great season for low carbon energy. Typically it's the summer when it's nice and sunny, all that kind of stuff. So an awful lot of power has been drawn, but back then a third of it is fantastic. And it's amazing that we're in this kind of position. We're still a third fossil fuels and a third kind of other, nuclear has all of its kind of baggage. But it's kind of an amazing position to be in. And when we start to look at this a bit further, there's a few graphs, sorry. This is about how much carbon is emitted every time we use a kilowatt hour of electricity. So that's how much energy we use. Back 10 years ago, it was about half a kilogram. Now it's about 0.2 of a kilogram. So it's already less than half of what it used to be. In the next 10 years, and this graph is slightly out of date, so we think it'll be slightly closer. We think it will be nearly zero carbon. It won't ever be quite zero carbon. There'll always be a little bit sort of in there, but it's kind of amazing. So this red line here is gas. Gas just doesn't get zero carbon. You burn stuff, CO2 comes up. That's it, kind of done. So we're in this kind of position where energy is becoming less of an issue in many ways. And when we look at global emissions from buildings, this is what we're primarily concerned with. About nearly 40% of all emissions are from buildings. But actually there's another bit we don't talk about. 11% comes from the stuff we make it from. And with this change from high carbon energy to this low carbon energy that we're going to see, is already happening and will be increasingly so. We've gone from a position, where this gray bit is about operational energy, operational carbon. So that's all of our lights and our heating, all this kind of stuff. This blue bit is the stuff we make our buildings from. We're going from really carbon intensive energy to very low carbon intensive energy, and it's all going to be about the materials we use instead. So it's kind of a different change. It's a different philosophy, and actually over the last couple of years this has really matured. Lots of people haven't really been able to keep on top of this, and now we're really starting to see it blossom and become very mainstream. But it's kind of a weird one. So with energy, we've got meters. We just read the meter reading, we send it off to the electricity board, and they tell us how much it's going to cost us, whatever else, so we can work out the carbon for it. But materials is a slightly different thing to do. What we have is this really techie life cycle assessment stages. This is for a British standard. There's stuff for other materials as well. But what it does is it breaks down how we assess what's in the material, what makes it. And if I can get this working. So we've got this kind of first bit, so stages A1 to 3, which is cradle to gate. And we're talking about taking this stuff out of the ground, taking it to wherever it needs to go to be manufactured and making it. And it might be there's multiple things all come together. It might be it's just one thing, but you can imagine that it can be quite massive. I think you've got your kind of construction, so how you're building it. So how do you get it to your site? You know, where's that factory it's been made it, and where does it get to from you? Is it being shipped there by a big container ship? Is it coming by a lorry? Is it being air freighted on a private jet? You know, what is it that's getting it to you? All has carbon emissions associated with it. And then how do we build it? Now, weirdly, when we think about building, we think about, gosh, you know, big JCBs or whatever, and cranes and all that energy you're using. Typically not so bad. The big thing we do is things like plasterboard. We might throw away 10 to 15% of our plasterboards because we're cutting it to shape and we just chuck it away. That's 10 to 15% more carbon instantly from that material. So thinking about wastage and how we use that. And then there's this kind of operation side. So how do we use the things, you know, for our buildings? You know, is it going to emit carbon just by being there? So some things will release CO2 as a byproduct or refrigerants or something. Then we've got to look after it, maintain it, clean it, maybe give it a lick of paint, repair it. Maybe it needs a new door handle, a new window bit of seating or whatever else. And eventually it'll just be knackered and it needs replacing. So how often is that? Is it 5 years, 10 years, 100 years? You know, understanding the longevity of the components and how you replace them is key. You know, really think about that. And then also there's a bit, you know, if you take it out, can you refurbish it and put it back in? Yeah, that'd be amazing. You know, rather than getting a brand new bit of stuff shipped from wherever. These two here are about operational. There's water use. We don't talk a lot about water, but we really should. It doesn't really have a lot of carbon emissions associated with it, but it's a precious resource. So that's something that's really key. And then at some point, you know, nothing lasts forever. It's got to take it down. Is it a big JCB that piles on in and whatever else, smashes it all up, ships it out to landfill? Maybe it doesn't make it to landfill, maybe it gets burnt and it turns into energy for a, you know, suburb of London or wherever else. Can you separate the items out so they could be recycled? Think about if they're glued together, you can't really take glue apart. If it's mechanically fixed, you can just take the screws off and you can have, you know, your steel and your wood or whatever else. They can go to their own special waste streams where they can be processed properly. So think about all these kind of bits. It really feeds into this kind of next life bit. We call this Module D. Module D is a kind of funny one. So you've probably heard about the circular economy. This is a really nice bit from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who are amazing at this kind of stuff. Well worth a look at if you haven't seen their bits and pieces. But understanding about what is it that stops you just reusing something in the first place. So always go for reuse. If you can get something reused, it's very low energy, it's very low carbon, it's perfect. If you can't do that, you know, can you, you know, recover some of it? Can you repurpose it? Can you clean it and alter it some way? And the very last thing you do is recycle it. Recycling very often means you get a lower grade material out at the end of it. There's lots of people working on how do you go from a material to a higher grade. That's one big avenue. Really interesting. Anyway, so well worth a look at. But how do you design things to enable that? It could be, for us, it's things like structures that are bolted, you know, rather than big concrete things which are cast in. How do you take them apart? So really interesting, pioneering bit of work. And then when we start to look at our buildings in particular, really think about where the things are going. What's interesting here from a point of view about, you know, buildings, we model them as lasting 60 years. This is where we're designing to now. This is what we used to be designing to. So we're designing for 2030, these kind of low energy buildings. Actually, in a residential building, 50% of the carbon footprint of that building is emitted before it's even ordered or gone onto site. It hasn't even left the factory, and yet half that carbon footprint is there. So we have a huge amount of control over the carbon footprint just by choosing slightly better materials. And then you can start to see, you know, there's little bits for delivery site and site wastage. And this kind of bit is your maintenance and repair, and then your energy, and then there's a little bit at the end for the kind of life. So really think about those material choices we initially make. It can have a huge difference. And interestingly, just by thinking about the materials we make, you can save up to about 40% of carbon footprint by making a slightly better choice. So kind of amazing. Or just using less of it, really easy, and it's cheaper, saves money, great. What we realized though is that we didn't really have that kind of leveler. People weren't sure how to talk about embodied carbon. So we created this carbon counts exhibition, which is still technically up. It was supposed to finish in March, but I think something happened. It was those distant days. So it's still in our office and just off Tottenham Street, just around the back of Goode Street Station. So you can walk by and have a peer through the window. We can't really let you in, unfortunately. And the idea of it was to be a leveler for information for everybody who walked past our office. They could pop in and have a look. It was an open exhibition, but also the clients we work with, the design teams we work with, our own staff, really getting them to talk about embodied carbon and in a kind of visual way. So what we set up was each of these, I don't know if this is working, there you go. Each of those totems is the volume of 1 kilogram of CO2. So it's about, I think it's about 570 liters of gas or something, that kind of area. And within it, we have these kind of holes. And inside each one, you've got a little sample. And each of those discs, and some of them are cylinders and some of them are discs, emits 1 kilogram of CO2. So that whole totem, so it goes floor to ceiling, it's about 600 wide and about 300 deep. It might be 450 deep actually, but that is represented by that one disc. So things like copper, the disc is 2-3 mil thick. If you look at some of the other things, the limestone one is about 500 mil long. It's a big long cylinder, kind of amazing. And the idea was we could have school children in and we could talk about it and they could pick it up and feel it and directly compare bits and pieces. And it was really successful. It seems to have really enabled it. We've turned it into a web page so you can all go and have a look at it there. It's well worth a look. And it's got a bit more of discussion. You can sort of look at all the different materials. And each one has a little idea of just, what it's taken to go from nothing to that material really quick, nice and easy. It's only A1 to A3, so it's only like cradle to gate. So we haven't done about transport to site and these kind of things. So kind of interesting. The other thing we have are white totems. That's where materials have absorbed 1 kilogram of carbon out of the atmosphere. So this is a lump of cross-laminated timber. So it's kind of a nice little thing. You can compare it. We have a bamboo one as well. So we had 2. And the bamboo one is much bigger because you need far more bamboo to absorb 1 kilogram of CO2. So it's not quite as efficient. Plus you need to compress it and squish it and glue it and stuff. So that's great. I mean, embodied carbon's fantastic. I could talk about that all day, and I do quite often. But it's only, I can hear you all asking, I'm sure, what about everything else? That's one thing, isn't it? So this is what's emitting CO2 in the UK. Electricity, it's residential, it's people, it's transport, it's businesses, it's agriculture, it's a very little bit of waste, interestingly. But CO2 is just one thing, isn't it? I mean, it's very easy to focus on one particular aspect. And I do worry that we miss some of these kind of beauty that sits around other places. So we have this here, which is our footprinting and biocapacity. I don't know if you've come across these kind of footprinting exercises. And what we're effectively saying with these ideas is this is how much space is on the planet to create crops or grow livestock or whatever else it is. And this is how much we require. And you can make a really quick idea of how much that footprint is in terms of global footprinting. So this kind of exercises. It's actually really quite tricky to do. But there's institutes that do it. There's a Stockholm Environmental Institute, I think it is, that they're kind of leaders for this. And back in 1971, so before our practices existed, we went over the amount of available space we had. So this is the number of Earths available to absorb and provide all that information, all that kind of goods that we need. So we've been sort of raising since then. And if you look per country, you can see where some of us sit. So USA is up here. They're using quite a lot of global hectares. So that's the unit we use, global hectares. We're down here, so we use about 5, which is about nearly about 3 planets worth. I'll show you that in a second. Luxembourg is about the worst with Qatar. Luxembourg have a very luxurious lifestyle. Interesting, who knew? And you can see there's some countries that are below that line, which is, you know, they're using less than 1 planet's worth. And the idea is that we all pulled down to this one line. That's the kind of idea. So in the UK, we use 3 planets worth of stuff, infrastructure, whatever else. And it's a bit about home energy, you know, the lights and the computers and the laptops and whatever else. A bit about the transport and how we get around, you know, cars, bikes, even public transport. Food can be quite big, particularly if you're always eating, you know, smashing down steaks and burgers. And then the goods and our consumerist lifestyle, the things we absorb and use, clothes, whatever else. Services and government and infrastructure are kind of things that we use but probably don't explicitly see. So services could be banks, who you bank with is a big one. Government, you know, council offices, that's all on us. We own that. And infrastructure, so, you know, we're building roads and whatever else. So that's all us as well. So you don't necessarily see all of it. But we use One Planet Living as a way of assessing this. So instead of just focusing on one aspect of carbon, we use this 10 One Planet principles to really get a broad, holistic overview of it. And it's much broader than even the global footprinting I was showing earlier. And it's a way of thinking about sustainability that I think is incredibly useful. And I won't go through all these because it's probably a bit tedious just to read off the sheets, but, you know, these 3 in particular, health and happiness, equity, local economy, and culture and community, incredibly important. You know, this is something that's happening with your manifesto and this group. You're creating a community that supports sustainability, and that's far more valuable in some ways than some of the aspects. You know, I could, you know, go to vegetarianism or something like this, but this actually just having this forum and the actions you can make as a consequence could be much bigger. So think about those kind of social aspects and how you encourage it. There's other bits, land and nature and water and food and travel and transport materials and waste and, you know, kind of energy, all hugely important, and all have that piece to play, and all that as equally as important as each other in many ways. And just a quick note on actually how you create a plan, because I know obviously you're going to, the aim of this is you will be making a manifesto at some point. Visioning, so we do a bit of visioning. That's the kind of first step. Talk about how we do it. We think about what the outcomes would be against each of the principles. So maybe it's, you know, everybody eats vegan, you know, action. So at FCBS, we can have vegan lunches every day. We have lunches when we're in the office. Those are the good days. And then the indicator, and make sure everything you do is measurable to make sure that you can keep people on track. I think it's really important. So this is the number of vegan meals we've eaten. Brilliant. Super easy. And then you can use oneplanet.com and you can create a network like this. This is our practice. And you can see how they all over interlap and interlink. These things are not, they're often thought of in isolation, but it's a nice way of sort of bringing it all together. And then you can start to apply it to projects. So Peter showed one Brighton earlier. And just to give you another kind of viewpoint on it, this little diagram just kind of shows some of the bits we're doing. So recycling the waste and wood chip boilers, and food waste is recycled on site and turned into compost and things for the allotments. Really lovely, you know, used on site. But it wasn't just that. You know, there's a nice picture of the allotments again, and the healthy materials and all that loveliness. But actually, we looked at the process of how you do it as well. So biodiesel for contractors' vehicles. So back 10, 12 years ago, that's about the best thing we could do to reduce that. You know, electric vehicles didn't really exist. A green travel plan, so we had lots of showers so people could take the bus or cycle or whatever else. The healthy canteen on site was supposedly the best canteen on site anybody's ever had. And also, you know, things like membership of local wildlife trust for contractors. A lot of these contractors probably hadn't had access to that. So how do you create that leveler for them? Really lovely. And local history toolbox talks. You know, somebody come in every day and say, look, this is this, this is this, this is the history of the place. Lovely, just for the contractors, you know, often maligned. So that's a really quick whistle-stop tour of embodied carbon and One Planet Living. I'll stop sharing my screen. We can, if there's any burning questions, we can pick them up now.
Yeah,
if
put them
not,
in the chat. I mean, if we get anything now, then great. But I am suspecting that, I don't know, people might they might have questions to ask now, but it might be towards the end of the talk.
Sure, yeah. So in which case, I'll hand over to Charlotte then.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, Joe.
That's great.
Cool,
So,
okay.
Charlotte, if you're ready.
Yeah, sure. Just give me 2 seconds. I'll start showing my screen.
Oh, you're very quiet there, Charlotte.
Oh, am I?
Yep.
Is that any better?
Just a little bit.
Sorry about that. I will try and shout very loud and clear.
Very good.
Hopefully not deafen you all in the process. Okay, 2 seconds. There we go. I'm sharing now. Let me know when you can see it.
Yeah.
Yeah, is it all good?
Yeah, great.
Cool. Okay. So hi guys. Thanks for joining us all. Thanks to Joe and Peter as well. And I'm going to talk to you about one of our projects today at Field & Clegg. So I'm Charlotte Knight. I work at Field & Clegg Bradley Studios, and I'm going to talk to you about Pea Soup House. And this is a project that we did in 2016 in the practice. It's kind of it's a little bit different to the work that we're usually kind of doing. I'm normally working on large commercial projects in the practice, but this was something that we did under our research arm. So the aim of Pea Soup House was to raise awareness of air pollution and bring communities together through food. I'm just gonna scan on to the next page. Can you see that one? Hopefully it's not too slow. So social and environmental responsibility is synonymous at Field & Clegg. We are committed to designing communities that support sustainable lifestyles and accommodate different patterns of living, learning and working. So within Field & Clegg, I mentioned there's a research aspect, and a small team of us there had a really strong interest in improving air quality in London. We wanted to develop these ideas a little bit further. With air quality increasingly deteriorating in cities, we believe that architecture has a really significant role in protecting the health of urban communities and improving air quality for everyone living in the UK. So we decided to make this a focus of a competition submission that we found that was released by the RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, based in London. And the exhibition that they were going to provide was called A Home at Brighton, and it was called Constructing Communities. So we saw this as a really great opportunity to further develop our ideas of air pollution in London. So Pea Soup House, where did that name come from? So in 1820, the artist John Saltain coined the term pea soup, which described the really thick yellow fog drowning London during the Industrial Revolution. So Londoners became known as pea soupers. And in 1952, this kind of came to a head with the Great Smog of London, attributed to 12,000 deaths, and it prompted the 1956 Clean Air Act. Today, though, pollution levels remain extremely high in London and are quite toxic for people living there. There are 5 main air pollutants in London that are measured: carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, particulates, and sulfur dioxide. So we were really interested in the data that was related to air pollution. King's College, those who are in charge of monitoring and recording from different stations around London. And this is some of the data, for example, that they've provided. We wanted to take this and translate it, make it something, you know, air pollution is an invisible thing for us nowadays in London. You know, back in the 1950s Industrial Revolution, you could see air pollution. It was thick, you know, sulfur dioxide, yellow fog. You know, it's invisible now. So we wanted to take this and make it into a visual architectural representation for people to see in order to communicate and share with local communities. So King's College, we collaborated with them and we used their data that they collected around London, and also their measurement system that they created, which is, if you look at this colour diagram in the centre that you can see, this is their DEFRA air quality index that they use to measure it. So it's a sliding scale system. They have a 0 to 10, and 0 is green and very low air pollution, and up in the red, the 10 you know, 10 out of 10 kind of thing, is really, really high air pollution. So this diagram shows each day in Euston Square and what the air quality was, what the measurement was that day. So you can see where you have really bad days down here in purple and red, and then really good days green up here. So, you know, this was a great way basically of making air quality that was visible. So playing on the term kind of pea soupers, the installation that we designed was obviously called Pea Soup House, and it was to create a visual representation of air pollution as the first step to improving air quality. So we designed the structure to represent 1 year's worth of air quality data, using this data here, it was 2015 from Euston Road. And that was kind of one of the key aims, but our main aim was to engage the community a little bit further by not only providing an architectural focus point within the city, but also to provide a more physical daily representation of the air quality. And we decided to do this in the form of serving soup from the structure. So the flavour and colour of the provided soup is matched to the daily air quality index I just mentioned, and it quickly allows people to visualise their local air quality. So, you know, you can see here, on a good day, you'd be served a pea and mint soup, and on a bad day, maybe a beetroot and horseradish. Luckily, we didn't need to serve that one at the time we were running the exhibition. But yeah, it was a cool way of engaging the local community through food. I mean, who doesn't love food? And the project helped to raise public awareness, obviously, of London's air quality through architecture, education, and event. This is a drawing here of our proposal for the structure. So we decided to use like timber battens, and each batten was painted to a colour to represent the day of the air pollution from the data that we had on Euston Road for 1 year. So each side of an elevation of the structure had kind of, you know, summer, winter, you know, each 4 seasons on it. And we decided to use low-cost carbon neutral materials, which we thought created kind of a you know, using sustainable materials, but it also created a structure that was really easy transportable, which again was another method of being a little bit sustainable about our design. So this is our final proposal that we submitted, the soup servery. So the idea is that you come along the street and you'd be served soup out the little hatch here, but then you could also come within the structure as well and meet and engage in dialogue and conversation. So this is just an image of just showing you how we took that data and started to apply it to the building. And this is the most vital people ever in this project. Was our volunteers who helped us throughout the whole project, from the early stages of design development up until construction, and came in and helped us every weekend to get this going, including our very own Joe as well. Thanks, Joe. And then this was the final thing, was getting it out onto the street and in use. So the most important thing about this project for me was the cross collaboration that we had on the project. We developed a collaboration with many different, it's a multidisciplinary kind of approach with different people. So I've mentioned King's College already, who helped us with the data and translating the data. They also helped us with lectures and talks. We worked with expedition engineers who were instrumental in the design of the structure, providing structural calculations. We also used Studio Mothership, who created our kind of graphical appearance for all of our exhibition work that was housed inside Pea Soup House, our flyers, our lectures, our talks, any kind of graphical representation that was needed for that. I think then for the most important collaboration was with the RIBA Young People's Forum. And that was a group of young students at the Royal Institute of British Architects who are learning about architecture And they helped us from the beginnings, you know, right at the early design stages, where we had held workshops with them. We all kind of collaborated, got each other's ideas circulating. We tested out small ideas for Pea Soup House on little models, designed the color arrangement, etc. So yeah, that was really great fun. And this image in front of you just kind of sums up the project, I think, in terms of the collaboration. We've got obviously architects in there, we've got developers, we've got students, we've got teachers, the engineers, and of course our very own Joe there on the top left. Yes, Joe. We also collaborated with Clark's Kitchen. Angelica was our chef, who was, you know, fundamental part of the project. It's not generally what architects tend to do, is going out into other sectors, but we decided to Fielding Clegg temporarily became a kind of a kitchen during this part of the project, and Angelica cooked and served us soup on a daily basis for the 2 weeks during the installation of Pea Soup House. And so this is one of the examples from the exhibition that was inside Pea Soup House. And you know, the main success of the proposal for this was through a program of serving soup, but then by using the inside of, you know, the installation, the internal parts of Pea Soup House as an opportunity to further display messages on the topic of air pollution. And this was supported by, you know, existing research, monitoring data, historical references. And it also, you know, used a way to communicate the history of air pollution, but then also the causes of global and local pollution today. You know, and the aim was that, you know, this was kind of focused on London at the time, but then we could, you know, adapt and change this wherever if it went to a different location anywhere in the world. So yeah, the next part is the kind of community engagement. There was a strong kind of creative and practical engagement with Pea Soup House through design workshops. I've already mentioned the RIBA Young People's Group, who are fab. And, you know, once it didn't stop there, basically, once the installation was in place and we were engaging with the local community, you know, we carried on the momentum of that by giving lectures and talks around London, going out to people on the street, talking to them there. So yeah, that was a fab thing to keep going afterwards. But so just to summarize and to conclude, Pea Soup House was basically a forum and a dining room. We aim to promote a contentious issue in a playful and tactful manner by conveying a message through architecture and food. As few spaces in the city really kind of offer that platform for discussion and community engagement. You know, its main aim was to disseminate knowledge, you know, in a new and inviting way, and to instigate change to improve our local environment. It was an architecture that provided a visual representation of air quality in London, and thus providing quite a distinctive landmark in the city. But it also provided a house for this idea to take shape and form, encourage a point of congregation for community sharing. And it was our first steps to look at help, you know, ways of promoting mental and physical health through awareness of local air quality. Okay, so I'm sorry if I whizzed through that a bit too quickly for you guys. I hope that was all okay. Back to you, Liz. Or Joe in this case.
Great, yeah.
That was brilliant, thank you.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yeah, really good. That was yeah, a long summer, wasn't it? Izzy, I got slightly out of order, so Izzy, unfortunately, you've got the final slot, the tough final slot. Do you want to give it a go, sharing, and then?
Sure, yeah. We're sort of jumping backwards a bit into back into some theory. Let me have a go at sharing my screen. So can everyone see that?
Yeah, that's great.
Cool. So yeah, I'm going to talk to you a bit about climate responsive design. So I'm Izzy. I'm an architectural assistant at FCB Studios, and I recently wrote a book with Peter that's quite topically called A Manifesto for Climate Responsive Design. So climate responsive design is sort of distinct from sustainability, but it obviously has sustainable outcomes. Crucially, climate responsive design is about responding to a unique set of site conditions, which in this case is the particular climate and cultural context of East Africa. So this piece of work was undertaken by the Fielden Foundation, which is the charitable offshoot of FCB Studios. And the charity enables FCBS staff to volunteer their expertise to help build capacity in rapidly urbanizing countries around the world, but particularly in Africa. The Fielden Foundation has designed more than 20 projects across Africa in Uganda, Rwanda, Malawi, Burundi, and even Madagascar. And the book that we've written that I'm going to talk about brings together the considerable expertise that we've developed from working in Africa and combines this with FCB Studios' experience of low energy design around the world. So the manifesto book evolved in response to a forum that Peter and I attended in Uganda on raising awareness for climate responsive design, which was organised by the Belgium development agency called Enable. And the Fielden Foundation was commissioned to develop a design guide which was built, which would build upon topics that were covered at the forum. So these were both hard and soft issues which would contribute towards improving people's living conditions and the environment. And when we attended the forum, we found that the participants were a bit skeptical about climate responsive design theory. They kind of wanted more to know about whether or not the theory had actually been applied and whether or not it worked and what it looked like. So in response, we structured the book to teach the climate responsive design theory through a series of real life built exemplar projects from across Uganda, Rwanda, the DRC, and Malawi. So there's essentially two parts to the book. I'm just going to show you some extracts here. So the first is the theory of climate responsive design. So this is a couple of pages on solar shading. And then these were fed into the practical application that was shown through a series of case studies. So this is the Cotton On Foundation Primary Schools by Studio Felix Holland. This is Alemia Primary School by Mass Design Group. And the National Teacher Training College by FBW Group. So what this structure did was enable us to provide an informative publication that would aid professional development in the region, but also provided a platform by which to showcase local practitioners' sustainable projects and innovations. So the book defines 9 key themes of climate responsive design. So there's engaging in a participatory design process, sustainable material selection, solar shading principles, passive ventilation mechanisms, how to achieve good natural daylighting, strategic landscape design, renewable energy systems, water supply and storage, and sanitation and hygiene. And those 9 key themes broadly overlap with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which I'm sure you guys know a little bit about. And the principles of climate responsive design relate most specifically to SDG 3, promoting good health and well-being, 11, creating sustainable cities and infrastructure, and on number 13, promoting climate action. So each theme in the book is color-coded and then is linked to specific aspects of each of the case study projects. And the exemplar projects that have been chosen represent a new generation of architecture in East Africa, which has a developing understanding of how the built environment can adapt to and help mitigate the impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss. So for the purpose of this presentation, I've just picked 4 themes and 4 corresponding case studies that will give an extremely brief overview of the book's content. So this is the African Wildlife Foundation's Conservation School, which is by Studio Felix Holland, or Studio FH, who are based in Kampala, Uganda. The project is located in extremely rural, remote Uganda. So it was essential that the building materials were sourced locally. And by using local building materials, you can save money on transportation costs, reduce embodied energy, and create local opportunities for employment, as well as ensuring that the buildings can be easily maintained if they deteriorate. And that increases the long-term durability, which further decreases the lifetime carbon emissions. So in East Africa, soil and stones from the site are the most basic, sustainable, and readily available materials to build with, followed by materials that are grown locally in a managed ecosystem, such as timber or bamboo. So East Africa's famous red earth provides numerous low carbon building solutions, which may be as simple as mud mixed with straw to make cob, or soil which can be stabilized with lime or cement. For the AWF conservation schools, Studio FH elected to use local granite for rubble stone foundations and a semi-dry stack plinth with compressed earth blocks used for the upper part of the walls. And the blocks here are 220 mil compressed stabilized earth blocks, or CSEB, and they're comprised of a mix of cement, sand, and soil in a ratio of 1 to 4 to 8. And instead of a typical concrete ring beam, the buildings also have a reinforced masonry ring beam, which is comprised of compressed earth trough blocks, which have a reinforced concrete infill. And the result is a monolithic near carbon-free wall build-up, which is made entirely on site by masons, which are just trained in conventional blockwork masonry. So the next example I'm going to talk about is solar shading. So this is a bioclimatic design principle where the basic idea is to allow diffuse daylight into buildings while shading from direct sunlight. So a large overhanging roof like the one that can be seen here at our Mzuzu University Health Clinic building provides shading to the windows and external walls, which reduces the external surface temperature of the building. So this Mzuzu is located in Malawi, which is just south of the equator. The sun here at midday and across East Africa is almost directly overhead throughout the year, which means that north and south elevations receive hardly any direct solar radiation at all, while the east and west elevations receive sort of low-level solar radiation in the morning and afternoon, respectively. And then the buildings are therefore orientated on the east-west axis. And we put the openings predominantly to the north and south, and then they're also offset from one another to ensure free-flowing movement of air. And we also made substantial effort to retain existing trees wherever possible in order to maximize shading of the east and west elevations. The health centre also uses shiny galvanized metal roofing sheets, and that reflects solar radiation, which helps to reduce radiant heat transfer into the interior. And the roof structure has a modular cassette design with an inbuilt ceiling and ventilated airspace, and that helps to keep the building cool, as well as concealing the plumbing and electrics. The cassettes are lined with reflective foil lining, which further reduces radiant heat from penetrating into the spaces below. So the next bioclimatic design principle is natural daylighting, which obviously helps to reduce the need for artificial lighting and improves the health and well-being of occupants. And good classrooms need to have quality diffuse daylight with blackboards, desks, and benches where children are working being sufficiently illuminated to facilitate comfortable reading and writing. Ruhehe Primary School by Mass Design Group is part of a vision by Mass to redesign learning environments in Rwanda. So the new classrooms at Ruhehe have light entering from opposite sides of the room and from above through polycarbonate roof lights, which create a balanced and even distribution of daylight internally. Roof lights actually emit 2 to 3 times as much light as regular windows, but they can cause glare and solar gain if they're designed incorrectly. So to combat this, Mass designed these vibrantly decorated light shelves, which are hung below the ceilings to provide shading from direct sunlight, while also transmitting it back into the room as diffuse daylighting. So finally, we'll look at the waste management strategy at the Early Childhood Development and Family Centres, which are by Active Social Architecture Studio, who are based in Kigali in Rwanda. And the centres provide communal water sanitation and hygiene facilities, or WASH facilities for short, for the local community's daily use. So each WASH block is equipped with ecological sanitation or eco-san toilets and child-friendly hand wash stations. And eco-san technology basically diverts the urine from the feces in order to ultimately use both for agriculture. So the liquid waste is piped to a tank for use in irrigation, and solid waste is collected and combined with layers of ash or sawdust to keep the composting chamber dry. Constructing the toilet cubicles in pairs allows for one to be in use while the other goes through a composting cycle of around 6 months, and then it can be emptied and used as fertilizer. So the waste management strategy at the ECDF centres is part of a holistic system that turns human waste into nutrients for crops in the on-site kitchen garden. And this helps to ensure high yields, which translates into improved nutrition, better health and well-being amongst students and the wider community. So that's a very concise snapshot of just a few of the themes in the book. I obviously haven't been able to give an overview of everything, but I'm just going to give a quick summary of our principles of climate response design, which are as follows. So first, to involve all project stakeholders in every stage of the design and construction process for low carbon, long lasting buildings. Leverage the construction process to build local capacity and provide training and work opportunities for the local community. Use local materials with low embodied carbon, which are preferably grown or recycled, such as responsibly sourced timber from managed plantations. Utilize passive ventilation strategies, natural daylighting and energy from the sun, but protect from solar overheating and glare. Strategic master planning of biodiverse landscapes can promote health and well-being and provide climatic cooling and mitigate the effects of extreme weather events. On-site renewable energy generation can cover or supplement energy requirements and help to offset embodied carbon in the building fabric. Recycle grey water and harvest and store rainwater for reuse and to help prevent flooding and erosion. Ensure healthy disposal and recycling of human waste, as well as adequate hand washing facilities and clean filtered water for human consumption. Designers, builders and building users should work together to combat climate change and learn from successes and failures. And finally, and kind of most importantly, that these rapidly urbanizing countries should aim to leapfrog already industrialized countries through constructing passive buildings and investing into clean energy and smart low carbon technologies. So our only real hope of reversing the impact of climate change is to ensure that there's a critical mass of people and countries that are aiming for a paradigm shift in our thinking around low carbon design. So we're now in the process of assisting and able to integrate the teachings in the book into university curriculum in East Africa. And the idea is that the content of this book will form the basis of an evolving database of exemplar projects that can be managed and contributed to by universities in Uganda and Rwanda. And the aim is for us to support a new generation of architecture students to take a holistic approach to sustainable building design. So hopefully the worst consequences of the climate and biodiversity crises can be avoided. So if anyone is interested and like to know more, the full book is available to download from the Field and Foundation's website, which is listed just here. And additionally, FCB Studios are currently hosting a microsite, which is dedicated to climate responsive design, where you can see how we've applied some of these principles to a number of different contexts and climate zones globally. Thank you. I'll hand back to Joe.
Brilliant, thanks, Izzy. That was a surprisingly rapid tour through such a, it's an incredible book, and it is free on the Field and Foundation, so do have a download and have a flick through it, because A, it's beautiful, and B, it's really informative and it's kind of accessible. So yeah, fantastic. Thanks, Izzy. So Lewis, I don't know if, I know we're a minute or two late.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much to all those presentations. Really interesting and covering like just a wide breadth of what the organization does over its history. I have put in the chat for people to share questions. I haven't got anything through yet, but please do not be shy, because I know people will have questions. But I have one that I just wanted to ask. And I think it was from the Peace Soup Initiative, because I know, Joe, you were speaking to me before about that, but I found it really interesting. especially talking about how you're working kind of across different sectors or working collaboratively with other kind of practitioners. But I was wondering kind of, and I guess this is an open question to all of you, around what role does architecture have in working with other creatives or other creative sectors in creating that kind of paradigm shift? Because I think if we see how that took a creative approach, the project, the pea soup project, and just kind of trying to create this visual marker of air pollution. And we were talking, I think, a bit earlier at the start of the talk about Extinction Rebellion and what it's done in terms of like creating a bit of that paradigm shift. And I think personally, a lot of it is to do with the fact that Extinction Rebellion is made up of a lot of creatives and takes this really creative approach. And I'm wondering how you see architecture's kind of role in that, in not so much about just raising an awareness, but actually creating a paradigm shift, because obviously architecture is involved in creating built environments that people operate within, and how it might affect people's kind of awareness of sustainable problems. Sorry, that was quite a long-winded question. But yeah,
it's a big old question. I don't know, Peter, if you're still there, I think you're probably best placed for it. But if not, well, I think what's interesting is there's a tendency for people to shut down when they hear about sustainability, and there's a kind of, and it's probably entirely justified, fear about the future climate change. And actually, the easiest thing to do is ignore it and hope it goes away and that somebody else fixes it with technology. And I do think there's an incredibly important aspect about making it accessible and really, helping people to build up a base knowledge in a non-patronizing way. I think we all have to be kind of humble and recognize that we don't all know the answers, and actually asking the question is probably enough, and being open to admit that you don't know the answer. Somebody somewhere probably will know the answer, and that's the kind of point. You ask it and hopefully somebody tells you what you should be doing. And I think things like architecture is kind of an interesting one. And to be clear, I'm actually an engineer, not an architect. So you end up this kind of bizarre position where you have to be an expert in technologies, cutting edge technology. So it's about renewables, and you have to be the exact opposite about mining and where you get minerals from, and then timber, and what's that kind of timber supply chain, and what's the ethical supply chain, and social value. So actually architecture becomes kind of an interesting melting pot of all of these things formed into a hugely expensive building. So there's an awful lot of risk, so you have to be incredibly diligent to make sure that you're not flippantly wasting 20-30 million pounds worth of project and still producing a space that's useful and delightful and people will want to be in. So architects interestingly sit at this kind of corner of all of these things, and I think that's probably why they're quite well placed to do it. But actually the whole creative aspect, I think, when Charlotte mentioned about Pea Soup House, we had graphic design team, Studio Mothership, who were just amazing. I'm more than happy to talk over a dry graph from Excel. The Studio Mothership, they just produce these beautiful graphics, and all of a sudden you look at it, it's far more intelligible. And that has a huge power. There's no old anecdote about who's going to change the world more. Is it a climate scientist or a PR company? It'll be a PR company every single time, but they need the information behind it. And it's collaboration and working across industry, I think, is where the real answer is. Sorry, long answer. And,
no,
probably with a kind of I don't know at
question.
The end.
I completely agree with Joe, and I think if it's not necessarily just about the role of the architect, but it's about cross collaboration across industries. And if somebody's asking the question, then it's the first stage to anything is creating the awareness. And the next step after that is obviously, in our case, buildings that are responsive to a climate emergency. So yeah, get together as much as you can with as many different people, because everyone brings their their talent to the pot.
And what I find interesting with FCBS is that you have that focus not only on the environmental topic, but also how it is intrinsic and links with the social as well, and kind of building those community spaces, which I think is something that transcends with artists that might be trying to just raise an awareness of this or create that paradigm shift themselves. whoever the artist might be, whether that's within the fine art world or like we're talking about with graphic designers, is not separating the two, I guess. And I found it really interesting from your talk just about how it kind of intersects both the environment and community.
Yeah, and I do think there's an element of always bringing along the community with you. And when I said in my talk about One Planet Living that it's all very well for us to talk about carbon and whatever else, but actually building a resilient community is far more valuable in many ways. And we're not particularly good at talking about aspects that are less numerically calculable. So if that makes sense. So, you know, how do you measure how connected a neighborhood is? Actually, it's quite a tricky thing to do. There are ways of doing it, but it's easy to understand how much energy people use because you can ask them how much their meters are used. So it does tend to get left behind, but it's hugely important. It's the foundation of actual society. So, you know, making sure that you're doing both at the same time it just pays massive dividends.
We've just got a question from Amber in the chat here. I don't know if everyone can see it, but I'll just read it out. I find that quite often the topic of sustainability is almost viewed as being taboo, such as how Boris Johnson spoke about XR members as uncooperative crusties, or the use of some sustainable methods such as hemp, human waste, composting, and even bacterial applications, kombucha, levers. I don't know how to say that word. Do you feel that this is something that comes up in the industry, or is it perhaps sustainable principles are becoming more accepted by general society? Do you think an increase in sustainable principles will diffuse these taboo reputations?
Charlotte, Izzy, Peter? I mean, I'm more than happy to go. I mean, so what's interesting, I spend a lot of my time, I'm kind of like the boogeyman. If a project says 0 carbon 3 times, I appear and I come and talk to them about 0 carbon. What is interesting?
He does it with me in the office.
Yeah, this is it. But what we have is a very fast moving industry that has become very aware of climate change and the emergency that surrounds it. And we're very quickly seeing that those people of, you know, the sort of Boris Johnson ilk, they'll be outmaneuvered very soon is what we hope. And I'm certainly seeing very commercial developers talking to us about 0 carbon, people who 5 years ago probably would have been pretty ambivalent. And there's a change within the financing structure. So people are more willing to invest in sustainable products and sustainable design and sustainable buildings because, you know, there's a really, you know, there's a fundamental risk associated with the climate change is a really good example that if you're building, you know, you're going to spend 60 million on a building, whatever it is, you do have an issue if climate change will affect it and destroy your building in 10, 15 years, you're going to pour more money into it. So there's all these kind of financial levers that we use to help push these things forward with difficult people. Bear in mind, you know, that people have an awful lot of pride and they don't want to be proven wrong. So it's you know, while Boris Johnson says, you know, we're, you know, XR crusties and look, I'm long-headed and bearded, you know, it's me, but yeah,
me too.
Yeah, but the same thing is it's very difficult. We shouldn't be treating them and tarring them all with the same brush. We should be encouraging it and taking them forward and not stooping to their level. So it is frustrating, but there is a lot of movement, which is exciting.
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that in the commercial sector, like Joe said. So when you know, for the projects I'm working in at Field and Clegg, we're not looking at specifying, you know, using mushrooms as insulations, that, you know, one of the projects out there now that you can use in housing, etc. But we are looking at, you know, how we can use materials such as CLT, you know, 0 carbon. So it's a really interesting push in terms of you know, in the commercial sector, definitely.
Izzy, I saw you unmuted. Do you want to add something as well?
Yeah, I guess, like I was going to say, I'm sort of surprised by the idea of sustainability being considered taboo, although I guess some people do, because I think it's just such a sort of fashionable term now, and it gets really bandied about and not necessarily with much integrity. And I think that sort of everyone's pushing for sort of passive and 0 carbon and passive technologies, but I think we really need to be going one step further now and actually thinking about proactive ideas and how we can be making a positive contribution to the planet and the environment, not just a neutral one. So I think that would be the next thing, really. That's like regenerative design rather than just passive design.
Yeah, regenerative. That's the kind of key word, isn't it?
And sorry, just a question from Dylan. Just wants to know about, are there specific areas, or I guess, areas of industry that are harder to work with when it comes to sustainable practice?
No, not particularly. What I would say is that there are certain aspects of the industry. Construction is famously slow at adopting new things, I think is how I'd put it. And if you think about the supply chains that we have, every single bit of those supply chains has risk built into it. And it goes from your kind of, plumber, builder, whatever, all the way up to the kind of financial industries. So it's kind of endemic. And what you have to do is work with all of them at the same time and bring them all up together. I would say that in construction, we do end up with kind of blokey cultures quite a lot, and they kind of perpetuate themselves. So actually, as you bring down other kind of barriers, bring in more diversity is a really good example. Actually, you start to break those things down, and people become a bit more responsive to other aspects in parallel. So it's it's not one particular area, but it is that kind of, I'd probably tar them, even though I said you shouldn't, the blokey cultures of the finance industry, the construction industry. It's pretty endemic.
Yeah, I get that. I was also interested in if there's no questions in chat, I'm just going to start asking stuff. The volunteers that you guys talk about, like, what's the recruitment process like for that? And do you look for like local communities, or do you just put out communications?
Charlotte, Izzy?
I can give Pea Soup as an example, maybe, and other projects I've worked on. I've worked on a couple of other small projects in Field and Clegg with a kind of similar team or bunch of colleagues in the office. But when we reach out, it completely depends what the brief of the project is. So, for example, with Pea Soup House, it was about constructing communities, and air pollution was something we were interested in. So we spoke to Joe Jack. Joe Jack directed us towards King's College, so that's someone we brought on, and it just kept growing from there, really. So then we were like, right, we need a structural engineer. Who do we go to next? Oh, there's some young guys working in Expedition. They'll jump on board with us. Oh, let's do that. And then we had another friend who's a graphic designer. They jumped in, and then when we went to the RIBA, like our chef, kind of Angelicia, she knew them. So it was just about putting out the feelers and making it project specific, I guess. It was the same on another project I worked on, which was an artist studio that was that moved to different locations around the UK, mainly coastal locations. And part of the brief of that was to collaborate with an artist. So again, it was just us reaching out to other friends in the creative industry and seeing who wanted to jump on board with us.
That's great. I mean, because I know I speak for a lot of people here, but like I know a lot of university students and people who have creative or particular professional interests can be very intrigued and very engaged in wanting to work with a company like yourself, and it can be very rewarding. And a lot of what we talk about is trying to get university students being used as this sort of resource. Like it's great to hear.
Well, like, so that's probably actually quite good to tie in for that. So for me, I at the time I was 25 working at Field and Clegg. I've been at Field and Clegg since well, let's not talk about how long, showing my age, but I was just out of UCL. I just finished my master's there, and an artist friend actually approached me and said, oh, I found this competition that I'd like to apply for, but I need an architecture friend to help me. And being kind of still young at that point and wanting to get involved in something, I said, yeah, but I can't do it by myself. I'm going to need some friends to help me. So I was sat down in Field and Clegg. We all sit down in the office and have lunch together in the dining space downstairs. It's fantastic. And I started chatting to a few friends, and they were like, oh yeah, we'll give you a hand. So that Joe Jack's just dropped a link to that project, but in the chat there. But that project, the observatory, was basically a bunch of students who all got together and applied for that competition. And there came a point where we were shortlisted, and we were, you know, it was from, you know, 300 applicants down to 6 of us. And I was like, oh gosh, like what happens if we win? We wouldn't be able to do this. And it's then when we approached Building Clegg and we said, guys, if we win this, will you help us, support us, do this under the practice, you know, the umbrella of the practice? There's a lot of things when it comes to architecture that you kind of need, you know, things like insurance, etc. So my kind of advice to students is like, you know, you don't need to necessarily look for a practice or others to do that, but you can go out yourself and see what's around, you know, see what competitions are about or whatever, anything in the creative sector, and collaborate with as many people as you can, depending on whatever brief you choose to look at. Hope that helps.
Sorry, thanks. Thank you for that. But I just wanted to cut us short because I know we have overrun a bit now. We did have a question from Rose. I don't know if we can do a very quick 1-minute response to this, but Rose has asked, looking at other creators and collaborative possibilities, what would your hopes be for a photojournalistic perspective? Where would you see a need for this type of artist expertise? Good question. You only have 1 minute.
Who's go on, Joe?
Photojournalist. I would look at, if I was a photojournalist, the thing I'd be doing at the minute, only because it's the top of my head, we have something called Architects Declare, and we have 11 points that we have to respond to as a practice to make sure that we are doing the right things for the planet. I would be looking at how you can support other industries to achieve those 11 bits. So there's Architects Declare, there's Construction Declare, and think about what it is. Yeah, there's ACAN, there's all these kind of groups out there that struggle with the kind of graphics and that kind of viewpoint you have. So think about those difficult things. So sorry, a bit of a fluffy answer, but think of something specific and go with that. I think that's kind of the answer. But again, reach out to us. We're local. We're in central London. You know, one of the Architects Declare things is we've got to share knowledge, so we kind of have to. And it was written by Peter, so you know, there you go. Give us a shout. We can't say no.
Thank you for that. We're going to round off now, but for everyone here that's joining the workshop, we'll have a 15-minute break. So if you all stay online, just with your screens off, and then, you know, go make yourself a tea, water, whatever, come back at 4:20, and then we'll continue from there just with the workshop and everything. It'll be very relaxed and laid back and a kind of an open discussion. So yeah, just have a bit of a breather and a break, and I'll see you all at 4:20. But I just want to say thank you very much to everyone from FCBS. It's been a really interesting talk, and hopefully can think about ways to kind of work together in the future and connect you to our students, yeah, in whatever ways possible.
Smashing. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for listening.
Thanks. Thank you so much.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Really cool. See ya. Bye.
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 So yeah, come back at 4:20, everyone, and then we'll continue with the workshop.
See ya.